Ever wondered how crack cocaine, a drug synonymous with the slums of New York, has found its way to the streets of Europe? Born in the gritty back alleys of New York, crack cocaine has a notorious reputation. It's not just another substance, it's a symbol of desperation, a product of the underbelly of society that breeds crime, violence, and despair. The mere mention of it conjures images of forgotten neighborhoods, of lives lost in the pursuit of a fleeting high. Crack cocaine, a potent variant of cocaine, is infamous for its quick, intense effects and the severe dependency it can create. The drug is often associated with the impoverished areas of New York, a city that has long been a battleground in the war against drugs. Here, in the crumbling buildings and graffiti-scarred streets, crack cocaine found its first victims, and its grip was unrelenting. But this isn't just a New York story. This is a tale that crosses borders and oceans. Like a shadow creeping across the globe, crack cocaine has slipped from the slums of New York to the bustling streets of Europe. From London to Paris, from Berlin to Madrid, the drug has found a new home, and with it, a new host of challenges. It's an alarming trend. Europe, a continent famed for its rich history, diverse cultures, and thriving cities, is now facing a crisis it was unprepared for. The rise in crack cocaine use is not just a matter of public health, but a societal issue that impacts the very fabric of these European cities. This is the enigma of crack cocaine, a drug born in the slums, now a global menace. A substance that began as a local problem but has since spread like wildfire, leaving in its wake a trail of devastation and despair. A question arises: how did this happen? How did a drug so closely tied to the impoverished neighborhoods of New York become a common sight on the streets of Europe's most vibrant cities? It's a complex puzzle with pieces scattered across continents and decades. But it's a puzzle worth solving. Let's unravel this mystery. To understand the journey, we need to go back to where it all began, the slums of New York in the 1980s. The birth of crack cocaine is a tale steeped in the socio-economic realities of the time. It was a period when the urban landscape was grappling with poverty, unemployment, and a rapidly growing demand for cheap, potent sources of escape. The 1980s saw a dramatic increase in the use of crack cocaine, particularly in the impoverished neighborhoods of New York. Crack cocaine, a smokable form of cocaine, was cheaper and more potent than its powder counterpart. This made it affordable for those living on the fringes of society who were desperately seeking an escape from their harsh realities. The low cost and high potency were a deadly combination, attracting users and creating a vicious cycle of addiction and dependence. But why did crack cocaine become so popular in the slums? The answer lies in the societal and economic conditions of the era. The 1980s were marked by widespread joblessness and a growing wealth gap. The slums were filled with individuals desperate for a way out of their dire circumstances, and crack cocaine offered a temporary, albeit destructive, escape. Simultaneously, the drug trade saw an opportunity for immense profit. Drug dealers capitalized on the desperation and hopelessness, flooding the streets with crack cocaine. The drug's affordable price and powerful high made it a lucrative commodity, and its popularity quickly spread. The spread of crack cocaine wasn't just confined to the drug users and dealers. It infiltrated every aspect of society, impacting families, communities, and even the political landscape. It fueled a wave of crime and violence, further exacerbating the existing social issues. As crack cocaine took hold, it left a trail of devastation in its wake. It tore families apart, ravaged communities, and led to an unprecedented surge in drug-related crimes and incarcerations. This was not just a drug crisis, it was a societal crisis, deeply intertwined with the economic and social fabric of the time. The stage was set, and crack cocaine was ready to take the world by storm. From the streets of New York, crack cocaine began its journey across the Atlantic. The transition wasn't a casual one. It required a network of intricate connections shrouded in secrecy and danger. It was the underbelly of society, the dark world of drug trafficking, that facilitated this voyage. Drug trafficking networks like sinister spiders spun their webs across continents, connecting suppliers with consumers, the slums of New York with the streets of Europe. These networks are complex, with many moving parts, each one playing a critical role. They are the veins through which this potent poison travels, infecting cities and towns along its route. But it wasn't just the supply chain that was responsible for this transatlantic journey. There was a demand pull. A growing appetite for crack cocaine began to emerge in the cities of Europe. The promise of a cheap, powerful high lured many, from the struggling and disenfranchised to the thrill-seeking and curious. Crack cocaine, once a stranger to these shores, started to become a familiar face, a looming shadow over urban landscapes. The spread of crack cocaine in Europe was not uniform. It found footholds in some cities quicker than others. Places with existing drug problems, areas of economic struggle, or neighborhoods grappling with social issues, these were the first to fall under crack's insidious influence. And so, crack cocaine, a drug born in the slums of New York, crossed oceans, traversed continents, and infiltrated the streets of Europe. This wasn't a migration of people or of culture, but of a destructive force, a force that wreaks havoc on individuals, families, and communities. By the turn of the century, crack cocaine had firmly established its presence in Europe. A drug that started its life in the underprivileged corners of New York had become a global problem, a problem that we, as a society, are still grappling with today. Suddenly, crack cocaine was not just an American issue, it was a European crisis. The drug, which had once been associated mainly with the slums of New York, had found its way to the streets of Europe, leaving a trail of devastating effects in its wake. As crack cocaine began to permeate European societies, the continent experienced a sharp upswing in drug-related crimes. The streets of cities, once peaceful, were now marred by the violence and desperation that came with the drug trade. Drug dealers, in their quest for dominance, often engaged in brutal confrontations, destabilizing communities and instilling fear in the hearts of residents. The health implications were equally shocking. Hospitals and addiction recovery centers were inundated with individuals suffering from crack cocaine addiction. The physical toll was undeniable, with users exhibiting severe weight loss, dental problems, and heart conditions. But it wasn't just the physical symptoms that were alarming. The mental health impact was equally devastating, with users experiencing paranoia, hallucinations, and severe depression. European governments and societies were caught off guard. The sudden eruption of the crack cocaine crisis necessitated swift and decisive action. Governments ramped up their efforts, implementing stringent drug laws and investing in comprehensive drug prevention and rehabilitation programs. Meanwhile, society responded with a mix of fear, disdain, and empathy. Fear for the safety of their communities, disdain for the drug dealers exploiting the vulnerable, and empathy for those caught in the grip of addiction. Despite these efforts, the crisis continued to escalate. The drug, cheap and highly addictive, proved difficult to eradicate. It seemed that for every dealer apprehended, another would rise to take their place. For every user who managed to overcome their addiction, another would fall victim to the drug's destructive allure. The battle against crack cocaine was, and continues to be, a complex and challenging endeavor. The crisis highlighted the need for a comprehensive, multifaceted approach that not only addresses the symptoms but also the root causes of drug addiction. The spread of crack cocaine had become a global issue that required immediate attention. Crack cocaine's journey from the slums of New York to the streets of Europe is a tale of societal failure and human tragedy. This journey has been one of despair, destruction, and in some cases, death. Crack cocaine, a drug born out of the economic despair of the late 20th century, has now spread its wings across the Atlantic, finding a new home in the streets of European cities. Our journey started in the heart of New York, where crack cocaine was born. It was the product of a society grappling with economic hardships, a society where the marginalized were pushed to the brink. The drug offered an escape, a brief respite from the harsh realities of life. But this escape came at a tremendous cost. Crack cocaine ravaged communities, tore families apart, and left a trail of devastation in its wake. From New York, crack cocaine crossed the Atlantic, finding its way into the streets of Europe. The drug, which was once confined to the slums of New York, was now a global problem. Europe, with its diverse multicultural cities, became a new market for this destructive drug. Much like in New York, crack cocaine found its victims among the vulnerable and marginalized sections of society. In Europe, the crack cocaine crisis has been escalating. Cities that were once famous for their rich cultural heritage are now grappling with the scourge of crack cocaine. The drug has not only wrecked the lives of individuals, but has also strained public health systems and law enforcement agencies. The global spread of crack cocaine has far-reaching implications. It's a stark reminder of the interconnected nature of our world. A problem that starts in one part of the world can quickly become a global crisis. It calls for a global response, a coordinated international effort to combat the spread of drugs. In the end, the journey of crack cocaine is not just a story of a drug. It's a story of our societies, our failures, and our collective responsibility. The story of crack cocaine's spread is a stark reminder of the global nature of the drug problem and the need for a coordinated international response.